2 years, 2 more glorious years of gun sales and wartime bank loans upon which to earn interest for many more years to come.
There is no question that war is a profit-making business. After World War I, Senator Gerald Nye held very famous hearings here in Washington where he dragged in some of the biggest bankers and industrialists and put them on the spot and just examined profits that were made by some of these major interests. War isn't profit-making business. Anybody who says otherwise is a liar or a fool.
They were able to manipulate us into World War I, and as a matter of fact, the war stretched out for at least another 2 years beyond what it would have gone.
Just when you think you're ahead of the game, someone changes the rules.
They did this knowing, with malice aforethought, to strengthen their own profits and to build their own institutions, their own banking institutions.
Many people believe that virtually all of the wars of this century have been caused for reasons that benefit small financial groups, those that move in the sphere of influence of the Bilderberger and the Trilateral Commission.
For an example, the war in the Balkans right now. Who's been providing Milosevic with arms and weapons? The Soviets have. Who has been financing the Soviet Union, their military industrial complex? The United States has. European bankers have. So the bankers have been financing both sides of every major conflict. Conflict brings progress, but controlled conflict brings controlled progress. Every major war, every major conflict, arms sales, loaning money to governments. You get their people to pay you interest back into the coffers of the bank, money that you created out of nothing.
Nobel Prize Milton Friedman claimed that the Federal Reserve caused the Great Depression by deliberately reducing the amount of money in circulation.
Depositors all over the country were frightened about the safety of their funds and rushed to withdraw them. There were runs, there were failures of banks by the droves, and all the time the Federal Reserve System stood idly by when it had the power and the duty and the responsibility to provide the cash that would have enabled the banks to meet the insistent demands of their depositors without closing their doors.
Congressman Louis McFadden, chairman of the House Banking Committee during the crash, agreed, saying, "The Great Depression was a carefully contrived occurrence by international bankers seeking to bring about a condition of despair so that they might emerge as the rulers of us all."
There was a memo circulated in advance of the stock market collapse. All the big guys, or the insiders, let's say, got out of the stock market during that 4-year period. They all got out. They were cash heavy when the market crashed. They were able to buy up major corporations for pennies on the dollar.
Franklin Roosevelt's own son-in-law called the Depression the deliberate shearing of the public by the world money power, triggered by the planned sudden shortage of call money in the New York markets. Insider Joseph Kennedy's wealth grew from $4 million in 1929 to over $100 million 4 years later. Then, as now, America's press failed to tell us what was happening. These scenes of unrest in America have never been seen before. Cameramen would shoot them, but newsreels wouldn't play them. Controlling the news started early in America. Of course, the lighter side of the news continued to get lots of play.
And they're off. Around the first bend, it's Rumbleweed by a beat. Fox Feather in second, and Hop skipping a jump. Now coming around the turn, it's Fox Feather. Hop skipping a jump is third. And Hop skipping a jump is down. Oh, ladies and gentlemen.
Fortunately, populists from President Andrew Jackson to William Jennings Bryan to Father Charles Coughlin were courageous enough to speak the truth.
May I remind our president with all due respect that not one of these soldiers cast a ballot on that fateful Good Friday night in the spring of 1917 to force a peace-loving nation like ours to take up arms for the profiteers and the exploiters of mankind.
And during the Depression, no one was more dangerous to the banking interests than Huey Long.
We've tried the Republican Party, we've tried the Democratic Party, then we've gone back and tried the Republican Party, and now we're back trying the Democratic Party. And unfortunately, whenever we get into power with either one of these parties, we find that the one crying need of our people, the redistribution of wealth, so that none would be too poor and none would be too rich, is always neglected by the party that is in power.
How many men ever went to a barbecue and would let one man take off the table what's intended for 9/10 of the people to eat? The only way you'll ever be able to feed the balance of the people is to make that man come back and bring back some of that grub he ain't got no business with.
But assassination as a tool of political policy was nothing new to this crowd.
President Jackson, for example, in his era, he was the leading opponent of the privately owned central bank. Well, what happened to him was an assassin who was connected to international bankers, it was later found out, got right up to Jackson, stuck 2 pistols in his belly, fired both at the same time, both misfired. Jackson was saved. And interestingly enough, even though history books don't spend much time dwelling on this bank problem, Jackson himself numbered this as his leading accomplishment. In fact, on his tombstone, do you know what's on it? It's "I killed the bank."
Someone changes the rules.
Going back to the American Civil War, Germany's Chancellor Otto von Bismarck declared, "The division of the United States was decided by the high financial powers of Europe." They were afraid that the U.S. would upset their financial domination over the world. They saw tremendous booty if they could substitute 2 feeble democracies burdened with debt to the financiers in place of the vigorous republic sufficient unto herself. Abraham Lincoln realized this and so stood firmly for preservation of the Union. But Lincoln needed money to win, lots of it. He went to the Wall Street bankers who wanted 36% interest per annum. Honest Abe chose a less expensive alternative, choosing to have Congress issue the money. The bills were called greenbacks, and they weren't backed by gold, only by the full faith and credit of the United States. With Congress issuing the money, not 1 penny of interest was paid to private bankers.
The assassination of Lincoln was related to the bankers wanting control of the money. The same thing went for John Kennedy, that he was planning to reintroduce the U.S. notes rather than Federal Reserve notes. And of course we go back to the Constitution of the United States, which provides that the Congress shall coin the money, the currency, and regulate the value thereof.
If you go out and ask the average person on the street who issues the money, they'll say the government issues the money. That's why the lie works, because people know intuitively that the government should issue the money.
Well, the Federal Reserve is neither federal and has doubtful reserves. You will not find the Federal Reserve in the blue pages of government in any phone book. You will find it in the business pages next to Federal Express.
Congressman Louis McFadden fought the Fed to his last breath. He once called it a superstate controlled by international bankers and international industrialists acting together to enslave the world for their own pleasure. 2 attempts were made on his life, one from a man wielding 2 pistols, both shots missed, and the second from a poisoning attempt, but fortunately there was a doctor on hand to pump his stomach. Of course, a conspiracy powerful enough to cause both world wars and the Great Depression would have to have a clubhouse somewhere, if only to split up the cash. It turns out they do.
If you haven't heard of the Bilderbergers, it's for one reason only. They haven't wanted you to. At their annual closed-door meetings, no outsiders are allowed even close to the building. Here are gathered the most powerful individuals of the Western world, united regularly at club meetings. Yet nothing is reported by the New York Times, the Washington Post, or the LA Times.
What really fascinates me is the complete blackout in the American press. For more than 20 years, I've gone down to the press club every day. I check the wires in their library, mingle with other paper boys, and I asked them the question many times, why, when if 120 film stars or 120 NFL football